The rain was a physical thing. A solid wall of water hitting the windshield. The wipers fought a losing battle. Their rhythmic slap-slap thump a frantic heartbeat against the roar of the Oregon night. I kept my eyes fixed on the slick black ribbon of the Columbia River Highway. My hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. I wasn't driving to anywhere. I was just driving away. The car felt cavernous. Empty. The passenger seat, where she should have been, held nothing but a small velvet box. My fingers twitched. I glanced at it. Its dark surface absorbing the faint green light from the dashboard. It was a poison I'd been carrying for hours. With a steady, deliberate motion, I picked it up. The velvet was soft, a cruel reminder of gentler things. I didn't need to open it. I knew what was inside. A simple gold band. A perfect, unbroken circle. A lie. My knuckles were white as I pressed the button to lower the passenger side window. The storm screamed its way into the car, whipping my hair and spraying cold mist across my face. I didn't flinch. I felt nothing. For a moment, I held the box over the abyss, the wind trying to tear it from my grasp. Then, I just let go. I didn't watch it fall. I didn't listen for a splash that would never come over the sound of the storm. I just saw it disappear into the violent, churning darkness below. A perfect circle, swallowed by chaos. I raised the window, sealing myself back inside the quiet hum of the engine. There were no tears, no anger, just a hollow space in my chest. A space where a heart used to be. The road stretched on, endless and black. 2 years earlier, the house smelled of lemon and thyme. It was the scent of my deliberate, desperate attempt at creating normalcy. It was the scent of hope. From the kitchen, I could see Chloe curled up on the sofa in the living room, a thick quilt wrapped around her. The afternoon sun, a rare and welcome guest in a Portland spring, streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting a halo around her head. She had lost her hair, but to me, she had never been more beautiful. She was a warrior. That's what I told her every day. And every warrior needs a quartermaster, someone to manage the supply lines, to sharpen the swords, to patch the armor. That was my job now. I was no longer just an architect who designed buildings. I was the architect of her survival. "How's my chicken roasting?" she called out, her voice a little weaker than it used to be, but still holding that musical lilt I fell in love with. "The chicken is achieving a state of golden brown perfection," I replied, my voice overly cheerful. It was a performance, and we both knew it, but it was a comforting one. Just a few more minutes, and the quinoa is fluffed, the asparagus is steamed. Everything is optimized for maximum deliciousness and minimal nausea. I heard her soft laugh. It was the best sound in the world. For the past 6 months, our lives had revolved around a brutal schedule. Chemotherapy on Tuesdays, blood tests on Fridays, days of sickness, days of exhaustion, and small, precious windows of feeling almost human. I had learned to cook all over again, researching anti-inflammatory foods, anti-nausea spices. Our pantry looked less like a foodie's dream and more like a holistic pharmacy. Ginger, turmeric, peppermint tea, manuka honey. I plated the food with the precision of a surgeon, arranging the chicken and vegetables on one of our good platest ones we usually saved for company. Every meal was a special occasion now. Every day she had an appetite was a victory. I carried the tray into the living room and set it on the coffee table in front of her. She pushed herself up slowly, a small wince crossing her face. I instinctively reached out to steady her, my hand on her back. I knew the exact locations of the aches in her bones. I knew the rhythm of her fatigue. "It looks amazing, Liam," she said, her eyes lighting up. They were the same brilliant blue eyes that had captured me from across a crowded gallery, opening 5 years ago. She was a photographer, a capturer of light in moments. Now, the cancer was trying to steal her light, but it hadn't succeeded. Not yet. She picked up her fork. "You know," she said, taking a small, careful bite. "I think I can actually taste this." I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. That's a win. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the clinking of our forks and the quiet hum of the city outside. Her camera was on the bookshelf beside her. It hadn't been touched in weeks. Before the diagnosis, it was a permanent extension of her arm. She saw the world through a viewfinder, finding art in peeling paint and the reflection in a puddle. I missed watching her work. I missed the way her brow would furrow in concentration, the way she'd bite her lower lip just before she pressed the shutter. "I was thinking today," she said, pushing a piece of asparagus around her plate. About Paris. My heart gave a little squeeze. Paris was our someday plan. We were going to rent a tiny apartment for a month. She would take pictures of gargoyles and lovers by the Seine, and I would sketch the architecture of old cathedrals. We were supposed to go for our 3rd anniversary. Then the diagnosis came, and someday was postponed indefinitely. What about it? I asked gently. When we go, she said, looking straight at me, her eyes fierce. Not if. When. I want to eat a real croissant. One with so much butter it makes you feel guilty. And I want to drink champagne for breakfast. And I want to walk until my feet hurt. And then you'll have to give me a piggyback ride back to our apartment. I reached across the table and took her hand. It felt so fragile in mine. It's a deal, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I will piggyback you all over Paris. I'll even learn how to say my wife is a goddess in French. She squeezed my hand. You're a good man. Liam. I'm just your husband, I said. In sickness and in health. Remember? This is the in sickness part. I'm just waiting for the in health part to kick back in, so we can get to the champagne for breakfast. She tried to smile, but her eyes welled up. A single tear traced a path down her pale cheek. I moved from my chair to sit on the edge of the sofa, pulling her into a hug. She was all sharp angles and bone, but she fit against me perfectly. I could feel the slight tremor running through her body. I'm so tired of being sick, she whispered into my shoulder. I just want to be me again. You are you, Chloe. I murmured into her hair, which was starting to grow back in a soft, downy fuzz. You are the strongest person I know. This is just a chapter. It's not the whole book. We stayed like that for a long time, until the sunlight faded and the room grew dim. I was her rock, her anchor in the storm. It was the most important role I had ever had, and I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I would have walked through fire for this woman. I would have battled any dragon. I loved her with a depth that felt infinite. A week later, we were in Dr. Miller's office. The air was sterile, smelling of antiseptic and anxiety. We sat in the 2 chairs facing her desk, holding hands so tightly our knuckles were white. Chloe's leg was bouncing, a nervous tic she'd developed over the months. I placed my other hand on her knee to still it. Dr. Miller entered, a file in her hand and a small, unreadable smile on her face. My heart hammered against my ribs. These appointments were torture. A few words from this woman could either give us back our future or shatter it into a million pieces. She sat down, opened the file, and looked at the papers for what felt like an eternity. Then she took off her glasses, set them on the desk, and looked at us. Well, she began, and her smile widened, becoming real and bright. I have some good news. I held my breath. Chloe, she said, her gaze fixed on my wife. We've reviewed the scans. We've looked at all the blood work. There are no detectable cancer cells in your body. You're in remission. The words hung in the air, surreal and electric. Remission. No detectable cancer cells. Free. Chloe's hand went to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. A choked sob escaped her lips. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled me. It was like I had been holding a massive weight for 6 months, and it had just vanished. I pulled Chloe into my arms, burying my face in her neck, and for the first time in a very long time, my own tears began to fall. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. You did it, I whispered, my voice breaking. You did it, my love. You beat it. She was crying and laughing at the same time. A beautiful, hysterical sound. We did it. She corrected me, pulling back to look at me, her face streaked with tears but shining with a light I hadn't seen in so long. We did it. We walked out of that clinic into the bright afternoon, blinking like creatures who had been living underground. The world seemed different. The colors were sharper. The air was cleaner. The sound of the traffic was a symphony. It was over. The war was over. We had won. That night, I cooked a celebratory feast. A real one. A juicy steak with garlic butter. A bottle of expensive red wine we'd been saving. We didn't talk about cancer. We talked about Paris. We talked about projects I wanted to take on at work. We talked about her setting up her darkroom again. We talked about the future. A word that was no longer terrifying. Later, as we lay in bed, I held her, memorizing the feel of her breathing. Steady and even. The nightmare was over. Now, our life could finally begin again. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. I had protected her. I had seen her through the darkest valley. Now we would walk in the sunlight together. Forever. I was sure of it. The celebration, it turned out, was short-lived. Not the remission itself that was real, a medical fact written in a file, but the feeling of victory, of having crossed the finish line together. That began to fade almost immediately. I expected us to fall back into our old rhythms, to pick up the life we had put on hold, but the pause button seemed to be stuck. At first, I chalked it up to recovery. The doctors had warned us that the emotional and physical toll of chemotherapy doesn't just vanish. Her body had been through a war, and it needed time to demobilize. So, when she slept for 12 hours a day, I told myself it was healing. When she seemed distant and lost in thought, I told myself she was processing the trauma. When she flinched slightly if I tried to be intimate, I told myself her body still felt like a stranger to her. I was patient. I was the architect of her survival. And this was just the rebuilding phase. But weeks turned into a month, then 2. And a new kind of quiet settled into our house. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of recovery. It was a tense, fragile silence, full of unasked questions. I would come home from work, excited to see her, and find her staring out the window, her camera still on the shelf. The woman who had talked about drinking champagne for breakfast in Paris, now barely wanted to share a glass of wine on the couch. "Let's get out of town this weekend," I suggested one evening. "Just a short trip. We could drive to the coast, to Cannon Beach, breathe in some salt air." She was sketching in a notebook, something she hadn't done in ages. I felt a flicker of hope, but she didn't look up. "I don't know, Liam. I still get so tired. We'll take it easy. We can just sit on the sand. I'll pack a lunch. Maybe next week," she said, her pencil scratching softly against the paper. The subject was a dead, twisted branch. Next week never came. The change was subtle but seismic. She started referring to her illness as my cancer, not our fight. She talked about the life she had before, as if I hadn't been a part of it. A wall was being built between us, brick by invisible brick, and I had no idea why. My role as her caretaker, the one thing that had defined me for so long, was now obsolete, and it seemed that without it, I no longer had a purpose in her life. One afternoon, I came home to find her energized for the first time in months. Her cheeks were flushed, her blue eyes sparkling. She had dug out her professional camera, and its lenses were spread across the dining room table like a surgeon's tools. "What's all this?" I asked, my heart lifting. "I have an idea," she said, her voice full of a passion I hadn't heard since before the diagnosis. "A project. A series of photos. I'm going to call it Rebirth." "That sounds amazing, Chloe. It's about the beauty and decay and new growth," she explained, her hands moving excitedly, like moss growing on a fallen tree, or flowers pushing up through cracked pavement. "It's about how you have to fall apart to come back together." She paused, then added, "I'm going to meet with Julian Vance tomorrow. He owns that gallery downtown, the Aperture Collective. He's always been interested in my work. I sent him the concept, and he wants to talk about sponsoring it, maybe even an exhibition." The name sounded vaguely familiar. He was a big deal in the Portland art scene, known for launching careers. I felt the pang of something I couldn't name. Jealousy? No, that wasn't right. It was exclusion. This was her world, a world I had only ever visited as a plus one. "That's fantastic news," I said, and I meant it. I wanted her to be happy, to be herself again. If this was what it took, I was all for it. The meeting with Julian was a success. He loved the idea. He gave her a grant to cover her expenses and offered her studio space at the gallery to work. Suddenly, Chloe was gone all the time. She'd leave early in the morning, camera bag slung over her shoulder, and come home late, smelling of darkroom chemicals and an unfamiliar, expensive cologne. She would talk about the project, but the conversations felt like reports. "Julian thinks I should use a different kind of film for the forest shots." Julian introduced me to a new printing technique. Julian. The name was a constant presence in our house, a ghost at our dinner table. I tried to be involved. "I'd love to see what you're working on." I'd say, "It's not ready yet," she'd reply, shutting the conversation down. "I don't want anyone to see it until it's perfect." My best friend, Mark, saw the strain on my face. We met for a beer one Thursday night, at our usual dive bar. The place was loud and sticky, a welcome dose of reality. "You look like hell, man," he said after taking a long drink. Thanks, I said wryly. You're a true friend. I'm serious. What's going on? I thought things were supposed to be getting better. Chloe's in remission. This should be the good part. I stared into my glass, watching the bubbles rise. I don't know. She's different. She's pulling away. She's obsessed with this new photo project. And this guy. This Julian. Mark grunted. The gallery owner. The silver-haired art guru. You know him? I know the type. All black turtlenecks and talking about the emotional resonance of negative space. Be careful. Liam. Careful of what? I asked. Though a cold part of me already knew the answer. She's just getting her career back on track. I should be happy for her. You should. Mark agreed. But she went through a near-death experience. You were right there with her, holding her hand. And now she's shutting you out and spending all her time with some guy who probably thinks a chemo port is a fashion statement. It's just weird. His words confirmed the ugly thoughts I had been trying to push away. I felt a surge of resentment, hot and sharp. I had slept on a hospital cot for a week straight. I had learned to give her injections. I had held her hair back while she was sick. And now, I was being treated like a piece of furniture from her old, sick life. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It had been our chemo day, a date seared into my memory. Now, it was just another Tuesday. Chloe had been out all day, working with Julian to frame some of her first prints for a potential gallery showing. I decided to do a deep clean of the house, a physical task to quiet my mind. I gathered all the laundry, including the clothes she'd tossed on the floor that morning. As I was emptying the pockets of her jeans, my fingers brushed against a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a fancy hotel downtown, the kind of place with a rooftop bar and $500 a night rooms. It was for dinner for two. From the previous night, a night she told me she was working late at the studio. My blood ran cold. It could be nothing. A business dinner. Julian was sponsoring her. After all, it could be completely innocent. But it didn't feel innocent. It felt like a stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. Later that evening, while she was in the shower, I did something I had never done before. I opened her laptop. My hands were shaking so much I could barely type in the password or dog's name. A relic from a simpler time. Her mail was already open. I told myself I was just looking for confirmation of the business dinner, a calendar invite, and a mail from Julian saying, "Thanks for the meeting." But my eyes scanned the inbox, and a subject line jumped out at me. Booking confirmation, the Nines Hotel. It was from 2 weeks ago. My heart was a drum against my ribs as I clicked on it. It wasn't just for a dinner. It was a room. For tonight's. A king suite. And the reservation was under his name, Julian Vance. I felt the air leave my lungs. The room started to spin. Every late night, every distant look, every mention of his name clicked into place, forming a picture of unbearable clarity. The sound of the shower stopped. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked into the kitchen and stood there, leaning against the counter, trying to breathe. She came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp. She was humming. She looked healthy. She looked beautiful. And she was a complete stranger to me. She saw my face and her smile faltered. "Liam, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "How was your late night at the studio last night, Chloe?" Her eyes flickered. A tiny, almost imperceptible sign of panic. "It was fine. Productive. Why? And 2 weeks ago? The weekend you said you were renting a cabin on Mount Hood by yourself. To get some nature shots. Was that productive too?" The color drained from her face. She knew. She knew that I knew. She clutched the towel tighter around herself. "Liam, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about Julian," I said, my voice cracking on his name. "I'm talking about the Nines Hotel. I'm talking about you looking me in the eye and lying to me. After everything we went through." The silence was deafening. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She just stared at a spot on the floor. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. There were no more lies left to tell. "Say something," I begged, my voice breaking. She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. But they weren't just tears of guilt. There was something else in them. Defiance. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you. You never wanted to hurt me," I repeated, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping my lips. "Chloe, my entire life has been about not hurting you for the past year. My entire life has been about keeping you alive. And I love you for that." She cried, the words tearing out of her. But you don't understand. When you look at me, you see the cancer. You see the sick girl you had to save. You still treat me like I'm made of glass. Her words were like punches, each one landing with surgical precision. Julian, he doesn't see that. She continued, her voice dropping. He sees me. The artist. The woman. He makes me feel alive again. Not like a survivor. Just alive. There it was. The final. Fatal blow. My love. My sacrifice. My sleepless nights and constant worry had become a cage for her. My care had become a brand, marking her as a patient forever. And another man had offered her an escape. He hadn't walked through the fire with her. He had just waited on the other side, with a glass of champagne and a hotel key. I stared at her. The woman I had sworn to love in sickness and in health. The sickness was gone, but it had left behind a poison more lethal than any chemotherapy. It had killed us. I just hadn't realized it until now. There is no blueprint for what happens after the world ends. As an architect, I live by blueprints. I understand foundations, load-bearing walls, stress points. I know that if you build something on solid ground, with the right materials and a sound design, it will stand. Our marriage, I had believed, was a cathedral. It had survived a hurricane. I thought its foundations were unbreakable. But I was wrong. The storm hadn't strengthened it. It had just exposed the rot in the ground beneath. That night, I didn't sleep on the sofa. I slept in our bed. I lay on my side, my back to the empty space where she should have been. I could hear her moving around in the guest room, the muffled sounds of a drawer opening, a tap running. She was making a new space for herself within her home, drawing a new border. We were no longer a unit. We were two separate countries sharing a fragile, contested territory. Her words replayed in my head on a relentless loop. You see the sick girl. He makes me feel alive. It was a masterful cruelty, turning my devotion into a flaw. My love, my care, my constant, unwavering presence had reframed it all as a cage. I had thought I was her shield. She had made me feel like her warden. The next morning, the silence in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. I made coffee, my movements mechanical. She came in, dressed for the day, her face pale but composed. She couldn't look at me. Chloe, I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. We need to talk. She nodded, staring into her empty mug as I filled it. I know. I'm not giving up on us, I said, the words feeling heavy and hollow in my own mouth. We have been through too much to just throw it all away. What you did, it's a symptom, not the disease. The disease was the cancer, the trauma. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. It was the architect in me speaking. See the problem. Identify the structural flaw. Draw up a plan for repair. She took a slow sip of her coffee. Okay, she said quietly. Just okay. Not, yes, I want to save us. Not, I'm sorry. Let's do whatever it takes. Just a single, passive word. She was agreeing to the process, but I could feel that her heart wasn't in it. She was indulging me. It was the first of many concessions that felt more like pity than partnership. We went to one therapy session. A woman in a softly lit room with beige walls and abstract art asked us questions about our feelings. I talked about the fear, the helplessness of watching her suffer. I talked about the joy of her remission. I talked about my confusion and the profound pain of her betrayal. I laid my heart out on the neutral-colored carpet. When it was Chloe's turn, she was reserved, articulate. She talked about losing her identity, about feeling like a specimen under a microscope. She called the affair a transgression and an error in judgment. Clinical words that stripped the act of its brutal, personal violence. She never once said Julian's name. He was just a concept, a symbol of the freedom she craved. The therapist scheduled a second appointment. Chloe canceled it the next day, claiming she had a scheduling conflict with a gallery event. I tried to rebuild on my own. I tried to remind us of the people we were before the diagnosis. I booked a table at our favorite restaurant, the little Italian place where I had proposed. The air was thick with the smell of garlic and old love stories. Remember our first time here? I asked, trying to force a spark. You spilled red wine all over your white shirt, and you were so embarrassed. But I thought it was the most charming thing I'd ever seen. She gave me a small, sad smile. I remember. But she wasn't there with me. Her eyes kept drifting to her phone, which she had placed face down on the table. She talked about her work, about the praise Julian had given her latest set of prints. She described the way he understood her vision, the way he challenged her to be bolder. She was talking about another man on our date, a date that was supposed to be about saving our marriage. Every word was a small, sharp twist of the knife. I paid the bill, and we went home in a silence that was heavier than ever before. The pretense of secrecy was gone. She no longer bothered to hide her late nights. She started attending art openings and dinners, events where I used to be her proud partner. Now, Julian was the one on her arm. I'd hear about it from mutual friends who didn't know the situation. Saw a picture of Chloe at the gallery benefit last night. A friend's wife texted me. Her new work looks incredible. So great that you two are so supportive of each other's passions. I typed back. She's the talented one. I'm just lucky to be along for the ride. The light tasted like ash in my mouth. I was living like a ghost in my own life. I was paying the mortgage on a home where my wife only slept. I was buying groceries she rarely ate. I was maintaining the facade of a marriage that was nothing but an empty shell. Mark was the only person I could be honest with. You have to give her an ultimatum, he said. His face set in a hard line as we sat in his backyard. It's him or you. This is insane. Liam, you're letting her torture you. She's been through so much. Mark, I argued, though my own voice lacked conviction. Maybe she just needs time to, I don't know. Figure things out. Figure what out? How to have her cake and eat it too. She's not confused. Man, she's selfish. What she's doing is cruel. The cancer was a tragedy. This is a choice. I knew he was right. Every logical part of my brain knew he was right. But my heart was still stuck in the past. Still tethered to the woman I had promised to protect. To leave her felt like abandoning my post. It felt like failure. The inevitable. Final argument happened on a Saturday. She was packing an overnight bag. A sleek, leather duffel Julian had bought her. Where are you going? I asked. My voice dangerously calm. I was standing in the doorway of our bedroom. Our bedroom. There's an art retreat on the coast, she said, not looking at me as she folded a sweater. Julian is one of the speakers. It's a huge networking opportunity. Stop it. Chloe. She froze. Stop what? Just stop lying. It's insulting. You're not going to a networking event. You're going away with him for the weekend. Just say it. She turned to face me, and all the weariness and frustration of the past few months was in her eyes. The quiet, apologetic woman was gone. In her place was a stranger with a hard mouth and cold eyes. Fine. She snapped. I'm going away with him. Is that what you want to hear? What I want, I said, my voice rising, is for you to remember what we went through. What I went through. Do you have any idea what it was like? Watching you disappear, piece by piece, holding you when you were too weak to stand. Do you think that was easy? No one said it was easy. Liam. She shot back, her voice ringing with a resentment that stunned me. But it was your choice to make it your whole identity. You didn't have to hover over me every second. You didn't have to quit the Grayson project. You chose to do all of that. I did it because I love you. I did it because you were my wife and you were sick. I was yelling now, the raw pain finally boiling over. I would have done anything for you. Then she said the words that finally, irrevocably, broke me. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. You think you saved me? The doctor saved me. The medicine saved me. You didn't do anything but watch. My cancer became your big project. The thing that made you feel noble and important. But the project is over. Liam, I'm not sick anymore. And you just can't stand it. Because now you don't have anything to fix. The accusation was so monstrous, so profoundly unfair, that it knocked the air out of my lungs. She had taken the purest thing I had to give me love, my sacrifice, and twisted it into a selfish act of ego. She had erased me from our story of survival. I was no longer her partner in the fight. I was just a spectator, a glorified nurse whose services were no longer required. I had no response. There was nothing left to say. The foundation hadn't just cracked. She had taken a sledgehammer to it, pulverizing it into dust. She zipped her bag, the sound loud and final in the silent room. She walked past me without a word, without a backward glance. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. I stood there, in the middle of our bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together. And for the first time, I felt the terrifying truth of the situation. I couldn't fix this. You can't rebuild a home that the other person has already decided to burn to the ground. That night, For the first time, I packed a bag. Not a suitcase for a trip, but a duffel bag filled with the bare essentials. A few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my laptop. I drove to Mark's house. My mind a blank. Gray static. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and just nodded. He didn't ask questions. He just pointed me to his spare room. A small space that smelled of old books and clean linen. Stay as long as you need, he said. That was all. In that moment, his simple, unquestioning friendship was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. I fell into a kind of numb routine. I would wake up on the lumpy mattress in Mark's guest room, stare at the ceiling, and force myself to get up. I'd go to work, where I would sit in front of complex architectural plans and see nothing but Chloe's face, hear nothing but her cruel words. I lost weight. The circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures. I was an empty structure, a building that had been gutted by fire. The facade was still standing, but inside, there was only rubble and ash. I tried to understand her. I went over our life together, searching for the cracks I must have missed. Was I too overbearing during her illness? Did I suffocate her with my care? I had loved her in the only way I knew how, completely, and with my entire being. If that love had become a burden to her, then what was the point of it? What was the point of me? Chloe and I barely communicated. We exchanged a few sterile text messages about bills and mail. She didn't ask where I was. I think she was relieved. She had the house to herself now, free to live her new, reborn life without my ghost haunting the hallways. About 3 weeks after I left, I had to go back to the house to get some important documents for work. I chose a weekday afternoon, praying she wouldn't be there. Mikey still worked in the lock. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I had made a mistake. The house was different. It didn't smell of lemon and thyme anymore. It smelled of her perfume and his cologne. There was a new painting on the wall in the entryway, a chaotic splash of colors that made me feel anxious. Julian's black trench coat was slung over the back of a dining room chair. He was here. He was living in my house. Everywhere I looked, I saw small, intimate betrayals. A different brand of coffee next to the machine. 2 wine glasses in a drying rack instead of one. A book I had never seen before on her bedside table, with a corner of a page folded down. This wasn't just my house anymore. It was their home. I was the intruder. I moved quickly. A thief in my own life. I grabbed my files from the office, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and grief. As I was about to leave, my eyes fell on the living room. On the mantelpiece, among the photos of our wedding and our travels, was a new, framed picture. It was Chloe, standing in front of one of her new photographs at a gallery. She was laughing, her head thrown back. Julian stood beside her, his arm possessively around her waist, his smug smile aimed directly at the camera. Seeing that photo was like taking a physical blow. It was the public declaration of my replacement. He hadn't just taken my wife, he had taken my place in her life, seamlessly editing me out of the picture. I felt a surge of pure, white-hot anger. With a shaking hand, I reached out, grabbed the photo, and without a second thought, I swept every single frame off the mantel. Glass shattered. The sound was explosively loud in the quiet house. Our smiling wedding photo landed face down on the hardwood floor. A picture of us in front of the Eiffel Tower, a cheap souvenir from a trip we never took, bought as a promise to crack down the middle. I stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the wreckage of my own history. It was a petty, childish act, but it was the only thing I could do. I had to prove that I had existed, that we had existed. I walked out, leaving the door unlocked behind me, the shards of glass crunching under my feet. I didn't look back. That night marked the true beginning of the end. My anger, for the first time, outweighed my grief. It became a source of fuel. Her accusation that I had made her cancer my project had been a lie designed to absolve her guilt. But I decided to make myself my new project. The project of survival. I found a small, furnished apartment downtown. A sterile, impersonal space with gray walls and a view of a brick building. It was perfect. It had no memories. I started seeing a therapist of my own. A no-nonsense man named Dr. Evans who listened without judgment and gave me practical tools for dealing with grief and anger. He told me to find an anchor, something for myself. That had nothing to do with Chloe. I thought about what I used to love before my life was consumed by caretaking. I used to hike. Before Chloe, I would spend my weekends in the Columbia River Gorge, climbing trails until my lungs burned and my mind was clear. So, The next Saturday, I drove out to Angel's Rest. It was a difficult, steep hike. As I climbed, my muscles screamed in protest. Every step was a struggle. My mind was a mess of angry, looping thoughts. How could she do this? After everything I did, how could she be so cruel? But as I climbed higher, the physical effort started to drown out the noise in my head. I had to focus on my breathing, on the placement of my feet, on the ache in my thighs. By the time I reached the summit, I was drenched in sweat and utterly exhausted. I stood on the exposed rock face, looking out at the magnificent, sweeping view of the gorge below. The wind was fierce, whipping at my clothes. For the first time in over a year, I felt something other than love, fear, or rage. I felt small. My personal tragedy, my broken heart, seemed insignificant in the face of such ancient, indifferent beauty. I had survived the hike. It was a small victory, but it was mine. This became my new ritual. Every weekend, a new trail. I was reclaiming my body, my time, my mind. At work, I threw myself into the Grayson Project ambitious, creative design for a new community library that I had put on the back burner when Chloe got sick. My focus returned. I found joy in the clean lines of a blueprint, in solving complex spatial problems. I started to feel like myself again. Not the old me, the happily married me, but a new version. Quieter, more reserved, wounded, but not broken. Chloe filed for divorce. I received the papers via a courier at my office. I signed them without reading them too closely. My lawyer handled the details. We would sell the house and split the proceeds. It was a clean, brutal amputation. The months passed. Autumn bled into a damp, gray winter. I saw Chloe once, from a distance. I was walking to a coffee shop and saw her across the street. She was with Julian. They were laughing. She looked happy. She was wearing a new coat, a vibrant red that I would never have picked out for her. It hurt. It was a dull, familiar ache, like a phantom limb. But it didn't destroy me. I just turned and walked into the coffee shop, the bell above the door ringing softly, marking my retreat. I was healing. The process was slow, uneven, and agonizing. There were days I would wake up and the grief was a physical weight on my chest, so heavy I could barely breathe. But there were also days when I would go hours without thinking of her at all. Days when I would laugh at a joke Mark made, or feel a genuine sense of accomplishment over a piece of work. I was building a new life on the rubble of the old one. A smaller life, a lonelier one. But it was a life that I was designing for myself. I was starting to believe that I might actually be okay. And that's when she showed up. It was a Tuesday night. Rain was lashing against the windows of my apartment. I was eating takeout Thai food on my sofa, watching a meaningless show on TV. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it, and she was standing there. My first thought was how different she looked. She was thin, thinner than I had ever seen her. Even during chemo, her vibrant red coat hung off her small frame. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her brilliant blue eyes were wide with a terror I recognized instantly. It was the same look she'd had in the doctor's office, right before he'd said the word malignant. She was alone. There was no Julian. "Chloe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She just looked at me, her body trembling, and the words tumbled out of her in a broken, desperate rush. "Liam," she sobbed, her composure shattering. "It's back. The cancer is back. And it's everywhere." The world tilted on its axis. The rain drumming against the glass. The smell of my pad thai. The low murmur of the television, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The only thing in focus was Chloe's face, pale and rain-streaked under the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway. Her words hung in the air between us. A toxic cloud. "It's back. It's everywhere." My first instinct, the one buried deep in my bones from months of conditioning, was to reach for her, to pull her inside, to wrap her in a blanket and tell her everything would be okay. My body remembered its job before my mind could process the new reality. But I didn't move. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand gripping the edge of the door, my knuckles white. This wasn't my role anymore. I was no longer her husband, her caretaker, her rock. I was the man she had left, the man whose home she had invaded with another. She seemed to shrink under my silence, folding in on herself. The terror in her eyes was now mixed with a raw, pleading desperation. Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small and broken. I stepped back. A mechanical, jerky motion, and let her pass. She walked into the sterile living room of my new life, looking around at the unfamiliar furniture, the bare walls. She looked like a ghost, completely out of place. She didn't sit down. She just stood in the middle of the room, hugging herself as if trying to hold her own fragile body together. What happened? I asked. The question was flat, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. I was a reporter asking for facts, not a husband asking for details. The pain started in my back a few weeks ago. She began, her voice trembling. I thought I just pulled a muscle, but it got worse. I couldn't sleep. I was so tired all the time. She took a shaky breath. Julian, he said I was being dramatic. He said I was a hypochondriac. A bitter, ugly satisfaction coiled in my gut. I hated myself for feeling it. But it was there. Of course he did. He had fallen for the vibrant, reborn artist. He had no use for a sick woman. The reality of sickness, ugliness, the fear, the endless, grinding exhaustion that wasn't part of the fantasy he had bought into. I finally went to see Dr. Miller today. She continued, her eyes fixed on the rain-slicked window. She ran some tests. An emergency scan. It's metastasized. Liam. It's in my bones. My liver. She finally looked at me. Her face a mask of pure, undiluted fear. She said the prognosis is not good. Not good. The clinical, sterile euphemism for a death sentence. We both knew what it meant. There would be no talk of a cure this time. Only management. Only borrowed time. The architect in my head, the planner, the fixer, started firing off questions against my will. What's the treatment plan? Did she get a second opinion? Who is her oncologist now? But another, colder voice drowned it out. This is not your problem. This is not your fight. Not anymore. Where's Julian? I asked. My voice hard. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. A tear finally escaped and traced a path through her makeup. I told him. This afternoon. He packed a bag. He said he couldn't do it. He said he wasn't strong enough to go through something like this. She let out a short, hysterical laugh that sounded more like a sob. He said he fell in love with the force of nature. Not this. She gestured to her own frail body. A vessel she no longer recognized. A body that had betrayed her once again. The irony was so thick. So suffocating. I almost choked on it. He had used her desire to feel alive to lure her away. And the moment a real, life or death crisis appeared, he had vanished. He wanted the flower. Not the soil it grew from. Not the rain and storms it had to endure. He had reaped the benefits of her survival. A battle I had helped her win. And now that a new war was declared, he had deserted. So you came here? I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. The last resort. The safe harbor she had abandoned but now expected to be waiting. Its lights still on. Its doors still open. I didn't know where else to go. She whispered, her shoulders slumping in defeat. My sister is out of the country until next week. My parents, you know how they are. They'd fall apart. I couldn't be alone tonight. She looked around my empty apartment. You seem good. Liam. You look strong. The words were meant as a compliment, but they felt like another twisting of the knife. I was strong because I had been forced to be. I was strong because she had broken me, and I had painstakingly glued the pieces of myself back together. My strength was forged in the fire of her betrayal, and now she wanted to shelter in its warmth. A war was raging inside me. The man I once devoted husband, the caretaker, was screaming at me to help her. He was reminding me of our vows, of the good years, of the woman I had once loved more than life itself. He was whispering that no one, not even her, deserved to face this alone. But the new man, the one who lived in this gray apartment and hiked mountains to outrun his own ghosts, was screaming back. He was reminding me of her words in our bedroom. My cancer became your big project. He was reminding me of the shattered picture frames on the floor of our home. He was reminding me of the profound, soul-crushing loneliness I had endured while she was building a new life with another man. This new man knew that his survival depended on self-preservation. To let her back in, to take on her fight again, would be an act of self-destruct. It would undo all the painful work of the past few months. It would be volunteering to be a casualty in a war she had enlisted him in, deserted, and then re-enlisted him in when her other soldier fled. What do you want from me, Chloe? I asked, my voice quiet and level. I needed to hear her say it. She took a hesitant step toward me. her hands outstretched as if in supplication. I'm so sorry, Liam, for everything. I was a fool. I was lost. I threw away the only good thing in my life. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm begging you. Don't leave me to go through this alone. Please. I need you. I need you. The two words I had longed to hear for months. But now, they sounded different. They weren't a declaration of love. They were a cry for help. She needed a function. Not a husband. She needed a caretaker. She needed the man she had discarded to resume his old post. I thought of my lonely hikes, of the sweat and the pain and the eventual quiet peace of the summit. I thought of the blueprints on my desk, the clean, orderly lines that promised a new and solid future. I thought of the quiet evenings in this apartment, the silence that was no longer lonely but had become a comfortable companion. This was my peace, a peace I had fought tooth and nail to find, and she was standing in the middle of it, a beautiful, tragic storm, threatening to tear it all down. I looked at this woman, this stranger who wore the face of my wife. I saw the fear in her eyes, the genuine, mortal terror of someone facing their own end. And for a moment, the old Liam won. Compassion flooded my system, overriding everything else. Okay, I said, the word leaving my mouth before I could stop it. You can stay here. For tonight. The relief that washed over her face was absolute. It was the look of a drowning person who has just been thrown a life raft. She took another step and collapsed against me, her sobs finally breaking free. Great, body-racking waves of grief and fear. I stood there, rigid, as she cried into my chest. I mechanically raised my arms and put them around her. But it felt wrong. It was like holding a stranger. My body was performing a familiar action, but my heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I was comforting the woman who had destroyed me. And as I stood there, holding the pieces of her broken life, I could feel the pieces of my own carefully rebuilt world begin to crack. Allowing Chloe to stay for tonight was like allowing a vine to take root in a crack in a foundation. By morning, it was already working its way deeper, threatening the entire structure. I woke up on the sofa, a crick in my neck, to the smell of coffee. It was a phantom scent from a life I no longer lived. For a disorienting second, I thought I was back in our old house, back in the days when making coffee for her was the start of a normal day. Then I opened my eyes and saw her in the small, unfamiliar kitchen of my apartment. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts that I left in a drawer, the one she used to steal to sleep in. It hung on her gaunt frame like a shroud. She was moving slowly, cautiously, as if her own body was a minefield. She was trying to recreate a domesticity we no longer shared. I made coffee, she said, offering me a mug. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, but she was trying to smile. It was a ghost of a smile, a painful imitation of the real thing. Thanks, I said, taking the mug. We were strangers performing a play of a life we once had. The script was familiar, but the actors were broken. The next few days blurred into a grim, surreal routine. She didn't leave. I didn't have the heart to make her. It wasn't a decision I made, but a series of non-decisions. Every morning I would wake up with the intention of telling her she had to find somewhere else to go. And every evening I would find myself picking up prescriptions for her or making her a simple soup she could keep down. I had slipped back into the role of caretaker with a sickening muscle memory ease. I went with her to her first oncology appointment. It felt like a terrible dream. Sitting in that waiting room again. The same beige walls. The same outdated magazines. But this time, the feeling was different. Before, there had been fear, but it was laced with a ferocious, united hope. Now, there was only a quiet, leaden dread. There was no we in this fight. I was there as a chauffeur, a note-taker, a familiar presence in a terrifying new landscape. The oncologist, a new doctor, was kind but direct. He laid out the treatment plan, an aggressive regimen of a new type of chemotherapy, combined with radiation. The goal, he said, was not a cure. The goal was palliative, to extend her life, to manage her pain. He used phrases like quality of life and making the most of the time we have. He was talking about her death. Chloe sat there, absorbing the words, her face a blank sheet of paper. I was the one who asked the questions. What are the side effects? What is the timeline? What support services are available? I was the architect again, trying to build a structure of information around an unbearable reality. When the doctor asked about her support system at home, she looked at me. Liam is with me, she said. I didn't correct her. In that sterile, fluorescent-lit room, denying it felt like an act of unspeakable cruelty. But outside the hospital, the lines were clearer. I was not with her. Not really. I drove her home. The silence in the car thick with everything we weren't saying. She needed me. But she had forfeited the right to my love. I was providing logistics, not comfort. My heart was a locked room, and I was refusing to give her the key. This new dynamic was a special kind of hell. I was present physically, but absent emotionally. I would make her dinner, and we would eat at the small table in my apartment, the silence punctuated only by the clinking of our silverware. I would ensure she took her medication on time. My phone set with a dozen different alarms. I would listen as she cried from the pain in her bones late at night. But I would stay on the sofa. I would not go to her. I would not hold her. It was a boundary I had to draw to protect what was left of my sanity. To offer that level of intimacy again would be to erase her betrayal. To pretend the last year hadn't happened. And I couldn't do that. My self-respect, newly and painfully acquired, wouldn't allow it. Her sister, Sarah, finally returned from her trip. She called me, her voice a mixture of panic and gratitude. Liam, thank you. Thank you so much for being there for her. I'm flying into Portland tomorrow. I don't know what she would have done without you. She's your sister, I said, my voice flat. Of course I wouldn't leave her on the street. When Sarah arrived at the apartment, she took one look at the situation at me, sleeping on the couch, at the invisible wall that stood between me and Chloe, and she understood. Later that evening, while Chloe was resting, Sarah and I sat in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her face etched with worry. This is impossible, she said quietly, shaking her head. What she's asking of you. It's not fair. Life's not fair, I replied, the cliché sounding hollow. No, but this is different. Liam, she told me everything. About Julian. About what she said to you. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand on my arm. Her touch was warm and compassionate. What she did was unforgivable. And now she shows up and expects you to just erase it all and be her hero again. You don't have to do this. You have every right to walk away. Her words were a lifeline. Hearing someone else, her own sister, validate my feelings, my anger, my right to self-preservation. It was like a pressure valve being released. I don't know how to walk away. I confessed, the admission tasting like failure. I see her, and she's so sick, so scared. And a part of me, the part that was her husband for 5 years, just takes over. That's because you're a good person, Sarah said, her eyes welling up. And she took advantage of that. She's taking advantage of it now. She needs help. Yes. But she doesn't have the right to destroy you in the process. The chemo started. The first round hit her like a freight train. It was 100 times worse than before. She was violently ill, weak, and in a constant state of pain. I took a leave of absence from work, telling my boss it was a family medical emergency. The lie was bitter. We were no longer family. We were just two people bound together by a tragedy and a history that refused to let go. I became an expert in her pain. I knew which medication worked for the nausea and which one was for the deep, aching agony in her bones. I knew how to prop the pillows to give her the most relief. I knew that she preferred crushed ice to water. I was functioning on autopilot, a machine of care. And through it all, she watched me. Her eyes would follow me around the small apartment. In them, I saw a desperate mix of gratitude, guilt, and a longing that I refused to acknowledge. She would try to talk about us. Do you remember that time we went camping at Lost Lake? She whispered one night, her voice hoarse from vomiting. It was so cold. We had to zip our sleeping bags together. You need to rest, Chloe, I'd say, my voice gentle but firm, shutting down the conversation before it could start. The past was a minefield. I couldn't afford to step there. My own world had shrunk to the four walls of that apartment. Mark would call, his voice full of concern. Are you okay? Man, this is not okay. I know, I'd say, looking at Chloe's sleeping form on my bed. But what am I supposed to do? Put her in a taxi and tell her good luck? I was trapped by my own compassion, by her illness, and by the ghost of a vow I had made to a woman who no longer existed. My project of rebuilding myself had been completely abandoned. The foundation was poured, but now a toxic ruin was being constructed on top of it, and I was handing over the bricks and mortar myself. I was sacrificing my own healing for the comfort of the person who had wounded me. And I was beginning to hate myself for it. I was beginning to hate her, too. The apartment, once my sterile sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. It was a place of hushed sounds, recycled air, and the ever-present, cloying smell of sickness. It shrank every day, the walls closing in. My life had been reduced to a series of alarms on my phone, marking out the hours and doses of medication. 7 a.m. anti-nausea, 9 a.m. painkiller, 12 p.m. another anti-nausea. My world was no longer measured in sunrises and sunsets, but in pill schedules and doctor's appointments. The man who hiked mountains felt like a character from someone else's story. The architect who found joy in clean lines and solid structures was a ghost. I was Liam the caregiver again. But this time, the role was laced with a poison that seeped into everything. It was a cold, simmering resentment that lived just beneath the surface of my calm, capable exterior. I resented the way she looked at me. With those wide, dependent eyes, she was a child again. And I was the parent, the one with all the strength. But her helplessness was a cage, and her need was a chain. I resented the easy way Sarah could come and go, offering a few hours of respite before returning to her own life, leaving me behind on the front lines. Most of all, I resented Chloe for her power. In her profound weakness, she was more powerful than she had ever been. She controlled my time, my space, my emotions. My life was once again entirely in service to her illness, and the life I had started to build for myself was a distant, fading dream. The cruelty of the situation was its intimacy. I had to touch her. I had to help her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk. I had to hold a cool cloth to her forehead when the fever spiked. These were the acts of a lover, of a husband. But they were performed with the detached efficiency of a nurse. Each touch was a reminder of the intimacy we had lost. Each act of care was a ghost of the love that was gone. She would whisper thank you, her voice fragile, and I would just nod, unable to say you're welcome. Because she wasn't. None of this was welcome. One evening, Sarah came over to give me a break. Go, she said, pushing me toward the door. Go for a walk. Get a beer. Breathe air that doesn't smell like a hospital. Just for an hour. I went to the dive bar where Mark and I used to go. It felt strange to be out in the world, among people who were laughing, arguing about sports, living their normal, messy lives. I sat at the bar and ordered a beer. The man next to me was on a date. He was telling a story, and the woman was laughing, her hand resting on his arm. It was a simple, beautiful moment of connection, and it was a world away from me. I was a visitor from another planet, the planet of sickness and death and broken vows. When I returned to the apartment, I could hear their voices from the hallway. I stopped outside the door, my hand on the knob, and I listened. Can't keep doing this to him. Chloe, Sarah was saying, her voice firm but gentle. Look at him. He's a ghost. He doesn't sleep. He barely eats. He's sacrificing everything for you, and it's killing him. I know. Chloe's voice was a ragged whisper. Every time I look at him, I see the man I destroyed. I see the pain in his eyes, and I know I put it there, but I'm so scared. Sarah, when he's here, I feel safe. He knows what to do. He always knows what to do. That's not his job anymore. Sarah insisted. You let go of him. You chose someone else. You don't get to choose him again now just because it's convenient. Just because you're scared. It's selfish. Do you think I don't know that? Chloe cried, her voice breaking. Do you think I enjoy watching him look at me like I'm a chore? Like I'm just some terrible obligation he can't escape? I hate it. I hate myself. But I would rather have him here, hating me, than be alone. Is that so wrong? The raw, desperate honesty of her words hit me harder than any of her apologies. I would rather have him here, hating me, than be alone. She wasn't asking for my love. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for my presence. My competent, resentful, hollowed-out presence. She was using me as a human shield against the terror of facing her own mortality alone. I quietly opened the door and walked in. They both fell silent, their faces etched with the evidence of their difficult conversation. I didn't acknowledge what I had heard. I just walked to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and started getting her evening medications ready. The routine was my armor, but their conversation had planted a seed. A dangerous, liberating thought. You don't have to do this. You have every right to walk away. The words echoed in my mind. For weeks, Walking away had seemed like an impossible act of cruelty. But now, for the first time, I began to see it as an act of survival. My survival. The turning point. The moment the tectonic plates of my resolve finally shifted came a few days later. It was 3 a.m. I was jolted from a light, uneasy sleep on the sofa by a sound from the bedroom. It was Chloe, crying out in her sleep. Not a soft whimper, but a sharp, terrified cry. I rushed into the room. She was thrashing, tangled in the sheets, her eyes wide open but unseeing. She was having a nightmare. "Chloe," I said, gently shaking her shoulder. "Chloe, wake up. You're dreaming." Her eyes focused on me. Wild with panic, she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't leave me," she gasped, her voice raw with sleep and fear. "He left me. Don't you leave me, too." She wasn't talking about me. In her nightmare, she was back in that moment when Julian had walked out on her. And in her terror, she was looking at me, her discarded husband, and seeing him, her faithless lover. She had conflated us. In her most vulnerable, unguarded moment, she had revealed the brutal truth. I was a substitute, a stand-in for the man she had actually wanted. Something inside me snapped. A cold, clean break. It was the final insult. The ultimate erasure of my sacrifice. All these weeks, all this care, all this self-abnegation, and in her subconscious, I was just a placeholder for the man who had abandoned her at the first sign of trouble. I pulled my arm from her grasp. "I'm not him." "Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The fog of her dream cleared. She looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes, followed by a wave of shame. "Liam, I didn't mean." "I know what you meant," I said, my voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "Go back to sleep." I walked out of the bedroom and closed the door behind me. I didn't go back to the sofa. I went to the window and stared out at the sleeping city, its light smeared by a light drizzle. And I knew, with an absolute, soul-deep certainty, that it was over. My duty was done. I had seen her through the initial shock, gotten her settled into a treatment plan, and made sure her sister was here. But I could not do this anymore. I could not be the living embodiment of another man's failure. I could not set myself on fire to keep her warm, especially when she was dreaming of another flame. To stay would be the death of me. Not a quick, dramatic death, but a slow erosion of the soul, a gradual grinding down of my spirit until nothing was left but a resentful, hollow shell. She was not the only one in that apartment who was dying. And in the cold, pre-dawn silence, I finally made a choice. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about vows or promises or even compassion. It was about me. I was choosing me. The decision, once made, settled in my chest with a strange and terrible calm. It wasn't a victory. It was an amputation. Necessary. Life-saving. But a profound loss nonetheless. I spent the next morning moving with a quiet, deliberate purpose. While Chloe slept, exhausted from a restless night, I began to separate my life from hers again. I didn't pack a bag this time. This was my apartment. I was not the one who would be leaving. But I gathered the things that were truly hers, few items of clothing she had brought. Her toothbrush, the novel on the nightstand. I placed them neatly in the duffel bag she had arrived with. It was a quiet, final act of division. Then I sat down at the small kitchen table with a pen and a pad of paper. A text message felt too cowardly. A face-to-face conversation would be a minefield of tears and guilt that I knew I wasn't strong enough to navigate. Words on paper felt right. They were permanent, unarguable. They could be read and reread, long after I was gone. My hand trembled as I started to write. What do you say to the woman you once loved more than life itself? The woman who shattered you, and the woman who is now dying. There is no etiquette for a letter like this. I started, and the words came, not with anger, but with a deep, aching sadness. Chloe, I don't know how to begin this, or how to end it. I just know that I cannot do this anymore. For weeks, I have tried to be the man you needed me to be, the man I once was. But he is gone. You and the cancer. You both took him, piece by piece, and I don't know how to get him back. Last night, you called out for him in your sleep, and in that moment, I understood. I am not the man you want by your side. I am just the man who is willing to be here. I am a bandage on a wound, not a cure. And my presence here is built on a foundation of resentment and pain. That is not fair to either of us. It is making your last days a quiet torment. And it is destroying what little is left of me. I have to save myself. I think. For the first time in a very long time. I am finally choosing me. I am finally accepting that I cannot be your hero. I cannot fix this. Staying here, watching you suffer, and knowing that my care is just a function, an obligation, it is a slow suicide of the spirit. I am writing this because I need you to understand. This is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of survival. I forgive you. Chloe, I forgive you for breaking my heart, for betraying my trust, for making me feel like my love was a burden. I forgive you because I cannot carry that anger with me anymore. It is too heavy, and I am asking you to forgive me. Forgive me for not being strong enough to see this through to the end. Forgive me for leaving you. Forgive me for saving myself instead of you. Sarah will take care of you. She loves you. I have already spoken to my lawyer. The money from the sale of the house is yours. All of it. Use it for your care. Hire a nurse. Make yourself as comfortable as possible. Consider it the last payment on a debt I no longer owe. I hope you find some peace in the time you have left. I truly do. Goodbye. Liam. Tears fell onto the page as I wrote, blurring some of the words. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote her name on the front. I left it on the pillow next to her sleeping form. Her face, in sleep, looked peaceful, almost like the woman I had married. It was a face I had to forget if I was ever going to live. I called Sarah. I'm leaving, I said, my voice hoarse. I can't do it anymore. The letter explains everything. She can't be alone. Can you come now? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then just a soft, understanding. Yes, I'm on my way. I walked out of the apartment without looking back. I didn't take anything with me. I just got in my car. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. I drove east. Away from the city. Away from the rain. Toward the rising sun. The first few hours were a blur of highways and gas stations. My mind was a roaring vacuum. Empty and loud at the same time. The calm I had felt in the apartment had shattered. And in its place was a tidal wave of guilt, grief, and a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. I was a ship cut loose from its anchor in the middle of a storm. I drove until the landscape changed. Until the lush, green familiarity of Oregon gave way to the high desert of Idaho. Vast and empty under a brilliant blue sky. I found a cheap motel in a small, forgotten town. I checked in, walked into the anonymous room, and collapsed onto the bed. And for the first time, I truly wept. I cried for the man I used to be. The hopeful, loving husband who believed in forever. I cried for the woman Chloe had been. The vibrant, laughing artist who had captured my heart. I cried for the life we were supposed to have. The one filled with trips to Paris and growing old together. And I cried for the sick, broken woman I had just abandoned, who was facing the end of her life alone. It was a storm of grief that I had held back for 2 years, and it left me hollowed out, exhausted, and strangely clean. I stayed in that small town for a week. I walked through the dusty streets. I ate at the local diner. I didn't talk to anyone. I just existed. I was learning to breathe again, to be alone without being lonely. I was learning to live in the quiet space I had created for myself. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mark, just checking in. He said, "Sarah told me you left. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think I will be." "Good," he said. "That's all I need to hear." We were quiet for a moment. "Do you know?" I started, unable to finish the sentence. Mark knew what I was asking. "Sarah's with her," he said gently. "She's in a hospice facility now. A good one. With a view of a garden. She's not in pain. She's comfortable." Comfortable. The word hung in the air. It was the best anyone could hope for now. I felt a pang of something to guilt, but a deep, sorrowful ache. "She got your letter," Mark added. "Sarah said she read it over and over. She told Sarah. She told her she understood." Those words were a gift, a release, an absolution I hadn't known I was waiting for. She understood. A few weeks later, I was in a coffee shop in a town in Montana, sketching the mountains in a notebook, when the call came from Sarah. Her voice was quiet, heavy with tears. "She's gone, Liam." It was peaceful. She just fell asleep. I closed my eyes. It was over. The fight, the pain, the long, tragic story. It had all come to an end. I thanked Sarah, My own voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. Not exactly. It was just finality. A chapter. A whole volume of my life had just closed. I left the coffee shop and drove up into the mountains. I parked the car and started walking, following a trail that led up toward a ridge. The air was thin and cold and clean. When I reached the top, the world spread out before me. A breathtaking panorama of snow-capped peaks and endless sky. I thought about Chloe. I thought about the broken promise of our love. I thought about her betrayal. And my abandonment. It was a story of failure. A tragedy with no heroes. Only survivors. But standing there, on that mountain, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like a man who had walked through a fire and come out the other side, scarred and changed, but whole. I had made an impossible choice. I had chosen to live. The road ahead was unknown. I didn't know where I would go, or who I would become. But for the first time since I had thrown that ring into the rainy darkness, I felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. The story of Liam and Chloe was over. But the story of Liam was just beginning. And as the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the valley, I turned my face toward the light and took my first step forward. Alone. And free.